Do you really know the person you sleep next to every night? What if I told you that a man had to disguise himself as a taxi driver to discover who the woman he claimed to love truly was? A forgotten card, an unknown name, and a doubt that became an obsession. Is she cheating on me, or hiding something even worse? This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about buried secrets, and about a man who discovered that the biggest stranger in his life was himself. If you think you know what's going to happen, prepare to be torn apart, because this story will turn you inside out.
Que já não conseguia sorrir. Você passou por mim sem dizer uma palavra.
They say silence is the absence of sound, but the silence between two people can be deafening. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently. The smell of rice burning in the electric pot competed with the soft lavender perfume that Susan wore every evening. I was watching television, but I wasn't absorbing anything from the screen. The images passed like shadows. She entered the living room, walked past me without saying anything, and went straight to the bedroom. A repeated ritual, automatic, as if we were living choreographed scenes of a perfect marriage, only without soul. But that night something was different, and it wasn't just the silence. Minutes later, I needed to get a pen. Susan always left her purse on the living room table. When I pulled it, the poorly closed clasp gave way, and it tumbled, spilling its contents across the floor. Lipstick, car keys, a floral tissue, and a small crumpled business card. There was a name, Elliot McRae. Below it, a handwritten phone number. I froze. Who was Elliot McRae? Why was his name there, at the bottom of my wife's purse? And more importantly, why had she never mentioned him? That simple white cardboard with black letters became dynamite in my hand. My heart raced. I felt that familiar chill we feel when we know, deep down, that something is about to change, and it won't be for the better. I put the card back as if I hadn't seen anything, but it was too late. The seed of distrust had been planted. Susan and I had been married for 10 years. 10 years without major fights, without scandals, with Sunday dinners, Saturday church visits, and smiling photos in picture frames scattered throughout the house. We lived in Lexington, Kentucky, in a colonial-style house with a wooden porch and a well-maintained garden. I owned an agricultural equipment company. She, theoretically, took care of the house, though she was always taking care of things in town. Our marriage was stable, predictable, and perhaps, for that very reason, vulnerable. Predictability can be a kind of blindness. That night, Susan slept, turned to the other side, as usual, but I didn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling while the name Elliot McRae flashed in my mind like an emergency siren. In the following days, I began to observe her like never before. Every gesture, every delay, every call she answered in the hallway or in the yard, every muffled laugh on the phone, I mentally noted times. I became a detective of my own life. One day, Susan forgot her unlocked phone on the kitchen table. When I heard the shower turn on, I couldn't resist. I opened the call list. There was a contact without a name, just a number. I called it. No one answered. But the automatic message said, "You've reached Elliot McRae's number." The confirmation hit like a punch. She was talking to him. But who was he? The image of Susan with another man began to corrode me from within. Some Elliot, perhaps younger, perhaps more affectionate, perhaps with something I no longer offered after so long. The anger, jealousy, wounded pride, everything exploded inside me in silence. It was on a cloudy morning, typical of late summer in Lexington, that I made the decision. I took the old farm truck, a yellow pickup, worn out, smelling of leather and straw. I installed a fake taxi meter on the dashboard. I put on a cap, sunglasses, changed my voice tone. I spent the afternoon practicing neutral phrases, and then I began circulating around town. Our neighborhood was quiet, with tree-lined streets and chickens pecking near wooden fences. But I knew that, eventually, Susan would call a taxi. She always did. She never liked driving in busier areas. On the third afternoon, it worked. I saw her leave the bakery with her phone to her ear. I raised my hand as if offering the ride. She got in the car without even looking at me. "Good afternoon," she said, smiling. I just nodded and put the car in gear. Susan didn't recognize me. My heart was beating so hard I could barely pay attention to driving. She was talking on the phone. I listened to every word like someone hearing a confession in a dark confessional. "No, Elliot, I haven't told him yet. He wouldn't understand. He wasn't raised like us. Antani has a different mindset, a different world. Pause. I know, but it's not that simple. I didn't hide it out of malice. It's shame. I'm ashamed, yes. Shame. Those words hit me like a blade. She wasn't talking to a lover. There was no romantic sweetness in her voice. There was fear, hesitation, pain. And there, stopped at the traffic light, with the entire city moving around us, I realized that maybe my wife wasn't betraying me. Maybe she was running away. But not from me, but from what I represented. That night at home, she hugged me as if nothing had happened. And I, now more confused than ever, held that embrace like a man holding a rope in the middle of a storm. I no longer knew who Susan was. But the question that was beginning to form, still timid, was, what if I also didn't know who I was? Wounded pride is a silent but powerful thing. It doesn't shout. It whispers unthought decisions in our ear. The next morning I sat on the house porch with hot coffee in my hands and a world collapsing in my head. The field stretched before me, green and alive. But inside me everything was confused and dry like cracked earth. Lexington was like that. Open fields, wide sky, but everyone locked in their own ranch of secrets. Susan left early. She said she was going to town to handle community market business. But I no longer knew if I should believe any word of hers. After she left, I went to the barn, searched the back of the garage, and found the yellow pickup we used years ago for farm deliveries. It was dusty, the seat smelling of old leather and tobacco. It was perfect for what I wanted. That same day, I had a fake taxi sticker made, improvised a digital taxi meter on an old tablet, and bought a simple cap at a downtown store. The disguise was crude, but sufficient. It wasn't to fool the world. It was to fool the woman who had slept beside me for a decade. I spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing a more closed, more rural accent. I lowered my voice tone, scratched my chin as if I had stubble. I was transforming not just into another man, but into a man who listened without being heard. The first time I parked in front of the bakery where Susan usually went, I felt my heart tighten like in adolescence. Before a fight you know is going to happen. She appeared 20 minutes later, with her purse on her shoulder and her hair loose, distracted on her phone. The sun hit behind her, forming an almost cinematic silhouette. I raised my hand slowly. She looked, smiled, got in the car. "Good afternoon," she said, like someone getting into a stranger's car. And that's exactly what it was. For the first time, I was a stranger to my wife, and she was a stranger to me. In the days that followed, I made more fake rides. I followed her discreetly on other occasions. Sometimes she recognized me and waved from the sidewalk. Other times she called me asking where I was, while I saw her, hidden, talking to someone in the market parking lot or entering stores where she had never bought anything before. But what corroded me most wasn't what she did. It was what I didn't do. I didn't ask. I didn't confront. I didn't demand explanations. I preferred the dirty and safe role of the spy to putting myself in the vulnerable position of a hurt husband. Until came the day when everything began to make less sense, and more sense at the same time. She called me for dinner. She cooked lamb, lit candles, wore that floral dress I liked, and for a brief moment, I saw again the woman I fell in love with, elegant without effort, discreet, with that sweet look that said more than 1,000 words. "Is everything okay, Antani?" she asked, taking my hand across the table. I almost said, "No, Susan. I know you're hiding something from me. I know you talked to someone named Elliot. I know you've been nervous, strange, and more than that, I know you're afraid of me, afraid of what I might think, afraid of who I am." But all I managed to answer was, "Just tired." She smiled tenderly. She got up, served more wine, and sat on the sofa, calling me with her eyes. I sat beside her. We stayed in silence with the distant sound of crickets coming from the porch and the wind hitting the curtains. If she was pretending, she was a brilliant actress. If she was being sincere, then the problem was inside me. The next morning, I dropped Susan off at the community center entrance and parked the pickup 2 streets up. I waited. She came out half an hour later and walked to a small square with peeling wooden benches and thick trees. She sat beside a tall man wearing a cap and boots dirty with earth. It was Elliot McRae. I knew immediately. The way she greeted him, without romantic affection, but with deep intimacy, left no doubt. I observed from afar. I saw when he handed her an envelope. I saw when she held his hands tightly, like someone who thanks and asks for forgiveness at the same time. and I saw finally when she discreetly wiped away a tear and said goodbye. I didn't follow her that day, nor did I ask anything when she returned home and pretended nothing had happened. But that night, for the first time in years, I found myself asking, what do I really know about the woman I love? And more importantly, would I love her the same way if I knew everything? The smell of old wood always brought me a certain peace. Maybe because it reminded me of childhood barns. Maybe because it represented something solid, old, reliable. But that day, beside Susan, that smell had another taste. A bitter taste of things kept too long. She got into the pickup as before, without noticing who was behind the wheel. She carried a fabric bag in her lap and a tiredness in her eyes that I had never seen. She turned on her phone as soon as she sat down and began to talk. I pretended to adjust the rearview mirror, but my ears were fixed on every word of hers. Yes, I brought the money. He'll be fine, Elliot. The tests are being paid for. Pause. No, I haven't told him yet. Antoni wouldn't understand. You know his way. My blood ran cold. I was driving on a dirt road with cornfields dancing in the wind outside, and inside I was pure chaos. She continued, I know he loves me, but he loves the woman I let him see, not the real one. You know, when I came here, I did everything to hide. Even my way of speaking I changed. We had nothing, Elliot, and I wanted to leave that nothing behind. I wanted to be someone else, reinvent myself. Silence. She sighed. Sometimes I hate myself for it. But he's so closed off, so proud. I didn't want him to look at me with pity, or worse, with shame. I swallowed hard. A hole opened in the middle of my chest. The car kept moving forward, but I felt lost. Susan wasn't talking to a lover. She was confessing to a brother, and what she was hiding wasn't an affair. It was an origin. She had come from a poverty I never imagined. She created a character to survive in the world I inserted her into. And now she was suffocating inside her own disguise. Further ahead, she asked to get out in front of an antique store. I stopped the car. She handed me the payment and said, Thank you, sir. I smiled behind the sunglasses, my heart aching. She had no idea she was thanking me for taking her to her own confession. I drove aimlessly through Lexington's secondary roads. I passed corrals, empty fields, houses with wide porches and dogs sleeping in the shadows. It was a world that Susan knew, perhaps better than I did, and that, for some reason, she thought she needed to hide. That same day, I returned to the antique store. I waited until the saleswoman got distracted and looked at the receipt counter. I found the receipt with her name. What had she bought? An antique picture frame, dark wood, with termite marks, and a small photograph of two children beside an elderly woman. That night at home, Susan placed the picture frame on the living room shelf, as if it had always been there. I pretended not to notice, but she looked at me, and for a second, I thought she was going to tell everything. Nice picture, I commented. It was my mother's, she replied simply, and changed the subject, except I knew that her mother, the one she said had died when she was a teenager, was alive. That was the night I stopped looking for a lover and started looking for a story. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was something deeper. A hole opened between two versions of the same woman, and I, in the middle of this abyss, trying to understand which one was real. The elegant wife of formal dinners, or the young woman in a simple dress with a hidden past who still said, "You okay?" when she was distracted. Lies have a smell, a bittersweet smell, like flowers that wither slowly in a forgotten vase. That night, while Susan washed dishes in the kitchen and hummed an old song, one of those country ballads she claimed not to know, I felt a knot in my throat. The living room was lit only by the amber light of the lamp. The antique picture frame, newly placed on the shelf, seemed to stare at me. That silent image of two children and an elderly lady challenged me. I got up from the armchair, went to the kitchen. I leaned against the door frame. Who is Elliot McRae? The sound of running water stopped abruptly. Susan stood with her back turned, motionless, with her hands still in the sink. The sound of crickets outside seemed louder now. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, without turning around. "I found a card in your purse. I called him. The voicemail said the name. Then I saw you with him on the park bench." She turned off the faucet, took a deep breath. "You followed me?" "Answer, Susan." She turned slowly, her face clean, her eyes welling up. "Elliot is my brother." The silence that followed wasn't one of relief. It was one of disbelief. "Your brother?" You never told me you had a brother. You said you were an only child. You said your parents died early. I lied. It was the first time in all our years of marriage that she said this so coldly, like someone admitting what can no longer be hidden. Why? I asked, my voice lower than I wanted. She sat at the table. Her shoulders dropped, like someone preparing to be beaten by their own story. Because I grew up in a wooden house that flooded every winter. Because we shared bread with margarine among 5 siblings and cried when the candle ran out. Because my father drank and my mother got beaten. Because when I managed to get out of there, I promised myself I would never go back. Not even with words. The tears began to fall, discreet, but she continued firm. When I met you, Antoni, you were the opposite of all that. An educated, secure man with a structured family. You talked about trips, wines, business, and I just wanted to fit in. I didn't want you to see me with pity or with disgust. I sat across from her, my hands trembling. You could have told me. She laughed, a humorless laugh, loaded with bitterness. You once said you wouldn't hire anyone with a country accent in your company, that people like that compromise the image. The memory hit me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't even remember saying that, but of course I had said it. She looked into my eyes for the first time in that conversation. I was afraid and ashamed and guilty, all at once, but I never stopped loving my family. I help. I support my nephews. I take care of my mother. I just hid it from you. The shame was now mine. I, so certain I was being betrayed, discovered that her greatest sin was having survived a reality I would never endure, and having tried to love me in the way she thought I could accept. We stayed in silence for long minutes. The wall clock showed 9:43 p.m., but it felt like midnight. Why now? Why were you going to see your brother? I asked. My mother is sick. Elliot needed help with the tests. I went to bring money, and the picture frame was hers. I looked again at the photo on the shelf. The children smiled. The lady in the center wore a simple dress, but her look was strong, familiar. That's your mother? Susan nodded. I wanted her to be part of my life, even if it was just in a photograph. That night, we didn't sleep in the same bed, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Susan cried in the bedroom. I cried on the sofa, and I realized, finally, that what hurt me wasn't her secret, but the mirror she put in front of me. The next morning, Susan left early. She just said, I'm going to visit my mother, and left without coffee, without a kiss, without the automatic gestures of every day. The house became too big without her, or maybe I had shrunk inside. I sat on the porch with the newspaper open and my head closed. The memory of the previous night throbbed. She had shown me a wound, and I, cowardly, didn't know how to do anything but retreat. But something inside me insisted, a stubborn need to understand, not just Susan, but also who I had become. What kind of man makes the woman he loves hide her own origin? I got in the pickup, not as the fake driver, but as the man who needed to see with his own eyes the truth behind the mask. I decided to follow the path to that house. The dirt road was old, one of those trails that cut through Lexington's cornfields and barbed wire fences like scars on the map. I had passed there other times, but never with open eyes. And now, every old barn, every car covered with tarp, every dog sleeping in the shade seemed to tell me a piece of her story. Susan stopped in front of a wooden house, 2 stories, with faded paint and open windows. The kind of house that resists time through stubbornness and affection. I stayed at a safe distance. I observed. She got out of the car and was received by an elderly lady with white hair tied in a loose bun. The two hugged for a long time. Then, Susan crouched down to kiss 2 children, who ran to her laughing. "Aunt Susie!" I heard, even from afar. My chest tightened. I stayed there, stopped, for almost half an hour. I saw when Elliot came out from the side of the house carrying firewood. I saw when the neighbors waved to Susan with familiarity. I saw when she hung a tablecloth on the line and laughed at some joke. She seemed whole, at peace, different from the woman I saw at home. She wasn't another person. She was more complete there. The image wounded me in a way I couldn't explain at the time. I felt like an intruder, a man observing, hidden, the woman he thought he knew, but now realized he only knew by half. Before leaving, I parked a little further ahead, near an old forgotten gas station. I got out, bought a soda, and asked the attendant, "The lady who lives in that house there, what's her name?" He answered like someone reciting something obvious. Mrs. Irma McRae, a warrior. Raised all her children alone after her husband disappeared into the world. Her daughter Susan was the one who made it in life, Lives in the city now, but never stopped helping her mother. Good girl. I swallowed hard. Susan was known there, esteemed, and more, admired, and I had never even heard of Mrs. Irma until 2 days ago. I returned home with a heavy head. I entered through the front door, took off my boots, and went straight to the shelf. I picked up the antique picture frame. I looked closely at the lady in the center. Her eyes were the same as Susan's. I put the frame back. I stood there motionless, as if that wooden frame judged me. At night, Susan returned with a tired but calm face. She sat beside me on the sofa without saying anything. I didn't say anything either, but her presence was louder than any word. "You went there, didn't you?" she asked after a while. I didn't answer. She knew. "Now you know where I came from." I turned my face, trying to disguise the shame that burned. She held my hand. "I don't want you to pity me, or my family. I just want you to know that I'm made of this too, that everything you love in me was born there." What could I say? The truth is, she was right. I loved that woman with sweet laughter, hidden strength, and silent courage. But I didn't know that all of this had roots in a wooden house, in a difficult childhood, in a mother who faced the world head-on. Susan was a tree, and I fell in love with the flowers, without wanting to know about the soil. That night, for the first time, I began to look at her as a mystery that didn't need to be unraveled, but respected. The next morning it was drizzling in Lexington. That slow rain which doesn't get you wet immediately but soaks the soul gradually. The house was silent except for the rhythmic sound of drops hitting the gutters. Susan was making coffee. The smell of cornbread baking in the oven spread through the kitchen, and there was a sad calm in the air, as if everything was about to change. I sat at the table. She served the cups, then sat across from me, with her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes were firm but tired, like someone who decided they wouldn't run anymore. "Antoni, do you want to know the truth? All of it?" I nodded, my heart racing. She took a deep breath and began. "I was born in a shack on the outskirts of Nicholasville, on land my mother shared with 3 other families. My father was a cowboy. He worked from sunrise to sunset, but drank all the money he earned. He was a man of dangerous silences. We learned early to step lightly when he was home." She paused, took a sip of coffee, continued. "My mother was different. She had a serene pride. She made lunch boxes to sell, sewed at night, helped other women in the neighborhood. When he disappeared, because he didn't die, he left. She raised us with what she had, and never asked for charity." I stayed silent. The image of that woman began to grow in my mind. "Mrs. Irma," Susan continued like someone who needed to empty themselves all at once. "I was the first in the family to finish high school. I went to college on a scholarship. I worked during the day, studied at night. For years, I slept in rented rooms, with a mattress on the floor and cockroaches on the walls. But I had a goal, to be someone else. Not out of shame for my mother, but out of fear of being rejected by people like you. That hit me like a sharp blow, but I didn't look away. When I met you, you saw me in a neat dress, hair up, measured speech. You took me to dinners, talked about investments, trips, elite cattle. I quickly learned to seem like I belonged to that world. And you never asked where I came from." She smiled bitterly. "I think deep down, you didn't want to know. You just wanted to be sure I wasn't like those women with calloused hands that you mentioned once at a business lunch." It hurt to hear, but she was right. I didn't ask. I just assumed. And behind each assumption was an arrogance that now shamed me. When we got married, I wanted to bury the past, not out of cowardice, but out of relief. I wanted to live as someone born again. That's why I said my mother had died, that I had no siblings. I buried my story. She ran her fingers over her wedding ring. But one day my mother needed help. Elliot got in touch. Her illness was advancing, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I started visiting them secretly, sending money, buying medicine, always afraid you would find out. I kept looking at the coffee cup, now cold. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, a taste of regret. "And you know what hurt me most?" she asked. I raised my eyes. It wasn't hiding all this. It was knowing that, if you knew, you might stop loving me. I took a deep breath and said, "I would never stop loving you, Susan." She laughed with teary eyes. "You don't love the woman I was. You only love the edited version." I got up, sat beside her, took her hands. "Maybe I loved an illusion, yes, but now I want to know the real woman, even if she comes with scars." She allowed herself to lean on my shoulder. We stayed like that, listening to the rain. Two strangers rediscovering love in the midst of the rubble of lies. That night, I did something I had never done. I went to the picture frame on the shelf. I took out the old photo and put it in a new glass frame, clean, beautiful, and hung it on the living room wall. When Susan saw it, she stopped for a moment, touched the frame, then looked at me with full eyes. "Thank you." And in that moment I knew we still had a long way ahead. But for the first time, we were walking on the same ground. There is no greater pain than realizing that the problem was never the other person. It was us. In the days following the conversation with Susan, I began to see the world with different eyes. But what shocked me most wasn't her world, it was mine. The way I had built myself on bricks of prejudice and demands disguised as values. At the company, I began to hear what I had previously ignored. The jokes I made about accents, the looks I cast at simpler employees, the resumes I discarded without even opening because they came from difficult neighborhoods. The worst reflection is the one that shows you who you really were, when you thought you were good. One afternoon, I sat on the house porch and watched the wooden fence. It was crooked in some places, rotten in others, but I had never noticed. I passed by it every day thinking it was perfect. That's how my marriage was. Susan had always been there, sustaining that facade, mending the holes with care. And I, arrogant, thought everything was in order because she didn't let anything collapse. Now I saw the cracks, and worse, I realized I was the one who caused them. On Saturday night, we went to dinner at a business partner's house. It was a formal event, one of those where everyone talks louder than they feel. Susan was beautiful, as always, but there was something new in her, lightness. She no longer seemed to be performing. She seemed whole, and for the first time, I didn't see her as a decorative piece of my success, but as my partner. In the middle of the conversation, one of the men at the table commented about the new field project. "We need to hire more people, but only workers with good profile. Nothing like people with heavy accents or thrift store clothes, if you know what I mean." The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke. Before I would have laughed, or at minimum stayed silent. But this time, I looked at him and said, "My father-in-law was a cowboy. My mother-in-law sold lunchboxes. My wife grew up in a wooden house, and she's the most dignified woman I've ever known. So, watch your words." The silence was absolute. Susan looked at me, and that look said everything. There was pride, there was gratitude, and there was a silent forgiveness beginning to be born. But not every new beginning is immediate. The next morning, I woke up and she wasn't in bed. I went to the porch. She was there, sitting, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the field. "I still don't know if I can forgive you for everything," she said, without looking at me. I sat beside her. "I haven't forgiven myself either." She breathed deeply, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "You hurt me without shouting, with expectations, with silence, with the look that said who I should be." I nodded. I didn't disagree, because it was true. "And even so, I loved you. Every day of all these years. I just loved with fear." That phrase broke me. She turned her face, looking at me. "Now, if you want to continue, you'll have to learn to love me without fear too. Love me with a past, with mistakes, with roots, the way I am, not the way you idealized." I touched her hand gently. "I'm willing to learn, even if it takes the rest of my life." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go of my hand. That afternoon, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for long minutes. I saw a man with hair beginning to gray, deep dark circles, a hard expression. But for the first time, I didn't look away. I took the old shaving mirror, the same one my father gave me when I graduated, and threw it in the trash, because I realized that much of what I was had been inherited without question, and it was time to break cycles. That night, I wrote a letter to Mrs. Irma. It said, "Mrs. Irma, I am not yet worthy of your daughter's love, but I'm trying to be. Thank you for raising such a strong woman, and for teaching me, even from afar, what true respect is." Susan found the letter the next morning. She didn't say anything, but she hugged me, long, strong, like someone beginning to believe that, maybe, there's still salvation for a man who decided to rebuild himself from scratch. The dirt floor creaked under my feet as soon as I got out of the pickup. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, gilding the old roof of the house. It was the second time I had come there, but the first time I was invited to enter. Mrs. Irma opened the door with a shy smile, white hair tied with a floral scarf, simple dress, bare feet on the wooden floor. There was dignity in every wrinkle of that face. "You're Mr. Antoni, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded, not quite knowing how to behave. The letter I had sent had been read and apparently accepted. "Come in. Susan is with the children in the backyard." I entered. The house was small but full of life. Pots hanging in the kitchen, old photos on the walls, smell of fresh cornbread from the oven. In the backyard, Susan was chasing two boys with a water bucket. She laughed with a lightness I rarely saw in the city. When she saw me, she stopped. The boys too. They ran to me. "Are you Uncle Tonho?" one of them asked. I looked at Susan, surprised. She laughed. "I talk about you to them." Not with anger. I knelt to be at their height. "That's me, yes, Uncle Tonho." They hugged me as if they already knew me, and in that embrace, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. After lunch, fried chicken, simple rice, fresh beans, I sat with Elliot on the porch. He was tall, quiet, with calloused hands, and the look of someone who had seen more than he would like. "Thank you for helping my sister," he said, without beating around the bush. "It was the least I could do." He nodded. "Susan is strong, always has been. We only had two options in life, fall or continue. She chose to continue, and pulled us along." I looked inside the house where she was collecting dishes, laughing with her mother. She seemed part of the walls, the stories, the earth. "And me?" I asked. "Do I still have a place in her life?" Elliot didn't answer immediately. He picked up a piece of straw and chewed slowly. "You still have to show that you can love without needing to dominate. She doesn't want protection, Antoni. She wants partnership." Those words kept ringing in my head like an old bell. Before we left, Susan called me to the back shed. There were boxes with old notebooks, rag dolls, saved letters, memories she never brought to the city. She picked up a box and handed it to me. "This is my story. If you want to love me whole, you need to know this too." We carried the box in our lap during the entire trip back. Inside it, there weren't just objects. There was the truth she had always carried alone. In the days that followed, I began to go more often to that house. I helped Elliot with repairs, fixed fences, learned to deal with the rhythm of that world, and more, I saw myself differently, less hurried, less imposing. One afternoon, Mrs. Irma called me for coffee. "You know, young man, when Susan left here, my heart was tight. She didn't just take her bags. She took our hope, but now I see that maybe she just needed time to come back stronger." "She's the strongest woman I've known," I replied. "And you? Are you the man who's learning to love her as she deserves?" I didn't know what to answer. I just held her hand. That night, I wrote another letter, but this time, to myself. "Antoni, you were arrogant, but you're trying to learn. That's strength. Don't be ashamed to change. Be ashamed to remain blind." I put the letter inside Susan's box. When she found it, she didn't say anything, but that night she slept with her head on my chest, and the silence between us was peaceful. There's a type of forgiveness that isn't asked for with words, but with transformation. And there is a type of love that only survives when it stops being comfortable and becomes true. The following Sunday, I woke up early. The sky was still pink, and Lexington was awakening slowly. Susan slept beside me with her hair loose on the pillow. For a moment, I watched her like someone observing a rare landscape, and finally understanding its beauty without trying to change it. I got up with a clear purpose. At the company, I called an extraordinary meeting. The partners, surprised, listened when I announced a new hiring policy, priority for residents of low-income rural communities, with training programs and extended benefits for families. From today on, our company won't just be profitable, it will be fair. There was resistance, murmurs. Someone commented, "This will cost us image." I replied calmly, "Then maybe it's time to change the image we have of ourselves." At dinner, I told Susan everything. She listened with attentive eyes, but didn't smile immediately. "I don't need you to change the world for me, Antoni. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me, because now I can see." She got up, walked to the window. The field outside was golden in the sunset. Then she turned and said firmly, "I want to continue with you, but with one condition." I nodded, without hesitation. "I want to be able to visit my mother whenever I want, without hiding. I want to bring my family here. Sit in the living room with them and know they won't be judged by the cups they drink from or the clothes they wear. Done. And more." She approached. "I want you to understand that if one day I feel I need to go back to being who I was before you, I will. And it won't be out of anger. It will be out of respect for myself. I breathed deeply. "If that happens, I'll help you pack your bags, but I hope it's never necessary." She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, that smile was whole. The following weekend, Susan organized a lunch, but not one of those formal dinners with expensive china and European wines. It was a backyard lunch with checkered tablecloth, free-range chicken, boiled corn, and country music playing from an old radio. And there they were, Mrs. Irma, Elliot, the nephews, neighbors, community friends, all sitting in plastic chairs, laughing loudly, eating with their hands, dancing on the grass. I, in an open shirt and bare feet, served soda and told jokes, without mask, without pose. For the first time, completely present. During the party, Susan pulled me by the arm. "Come, I want to show you something." We went to the small back room she had transformed into a studio. There, on the table, were several hand-sewn scraps, forming a colorful quilt. "This here is me," she said. "Each piece is a phase, a pain, a victory. None of them is beautiful alone, but together, they form something worthwhile." "And where am I in this quilt?" I asked, smiling. She picked up a dark blue scrap with crooked but strong stitching. "Here, the part that hurt the most, but also taught the most." I stayed silent, touching the fabric like someone touching their own past. That night, when the last guest left and the house was filled again only with our breathing, Susan called me to dance. In the middle of the living room, barefoot, in silence. The music was just ours, and in that simple embrace, with eyes in eyes, I understood we were no longer the same. We were better, because now, finally, we loved each other not despite the scars, but because of them. Summer was ending in Lexington, but that day dawned with a sky so blue it seemed like a celebration. The McRae family property buzzed with movement. Colorful pennants danced in the wind, the smell of cornbread mixed with strong coffee, and the sound of the guitar filled the air like a prayer of gratitude. It was the Harvest Festival, a simple tradition of the rural community, forgotten by many, but revived by Susan with a joy that was almost militant. Mrs. Irma organized everything with firmness and pride. Elliot set up the food tent. The children ran with bare feet on the earth, and I, with my shirt sleeves rolled up and hands dirty with charcoal, turned corn on the improvised grill. That place, those people, were mine now too. At 3 in the afternoon, Susan took the simple microphone and asked for silence. Her voice sounded firm but sweet. She climbed on a small crate and looked at everyone. For many years of my life, I hid my roots. I distanced myself from this ground, these people, this story, out of fear, out of shame. But today, before you, I want to say, I return here with a clean heart, and with a love that now knows how to see beyond appearance. She looked at me. I approached, without fear. She extended her hand. I climbed on the crate with her, and there, before everyone, I said, I was a blind man, proud, and without realizing it, I was cruel to the woman who loved me most. But today I'm here not to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to thank you for letting me relearn, for letting me stay. The applause came spontaneously, simple, sincere. And then Mrs. Irma took the microphone. Her voice was low, but full of wisdom. Loving is work for strong people, forgiving too. I saw this girl born in a shack with a dirt floor. I saw her bleed, smile, fall, and get up. And today I see that she didn't come back alone. She brought a new man with her. I looked at Susan. She cried without hiding. And there, in that open field, under Kentucky's wide sky, I knew we were starting over. In the months that followed, our lives transformed. The community school, previously in ruins, was renovated with financial help from our company. Employees began coming from rural areas, and I made sure to know them by name, to look them in the eyes, to hear their stories. Susan started a tradition rescue project, community sewing, country dancing, roots music. It was as if each action of hers was a bridge between two worlds she had tried to keep separate for so long. And I learned to be a link, not an obstacle. One morning, I found Susan sitting on the porch, sewing the patchwork quilt. "Is there still room for more pieces?" I asked, sitting beside her. She smiled. "There's always room." "And ours? How is it?" She showed a new patch, earthy red, firm, with small golden stitches. "This one represents our new beginning, made with pain, but sewn with choice." I touched the fabric, closed my eyes. She rested her head on my shoulder. "We're not perfect, Antoni, but now, we're real." And in that instant, I understood once and for all, love is not the absence of flaws. It's the presence of courage. The camera of life pulled away, like in an old movie ending. The background music was country, but soft. The green fields stretched to the horizon, and there we were, two survivors of our own ignorance, rebuilding a home on truth. The lesson I engraved in my soul: truth hurts, but lies make you sick. And when we have the courage to see the other as they are, and not as we want them to be, love stops being fantasy and becomes legacy.
Na sala escura, o silêncio nos separa, os olhos fixos, o coração em guerra. Tudo parecia perfeito, mas a dor estava aqui, entre as sombras de um amor que já não conseguia sorrir. Você passou por mim sem dizer uma palavra, e eu olhei para a bolsa, vi o que estava escondido, um nome que não conhecia, o medo que me invadiu, e o coração disparou, me levando a um caminho perdido. Raízes no chão, o passado a chamar. Eu olhei para você, mas não sabia mais quem amar. Entre o orgulho e a dor, me perdi em silêncio, e a verdade chegou como um vento forte e intenso. Coloquei o boné, os óculos escuros, me escondi. Naquela caminhonete o disfarce foi a minha dor. Te observei falar e o nome que não saía de mim, e eu me vi perdido entre o amor e o rancor. Mas não era o amor que você me guardava, não era traição. Era o medo de se mostrar, o peso da repressão. E eu fui mais longe, perdi meu lugar, tentando entender quem você era, tentando me encontrar. Raízes no chão, o passado a chamar. Eu olhei para você, mas não sabia mais quem amar. Entre o orgulho e a dor, me perdi em silêncio, e a verdade chegou como um vento forte e intenso. E agora vejo você com lágrimas nos olhos, dizendo que o passado é um peso, mas faz parte de quem é. Não sou mais o mesmo, mas o que você me fez ser foi entender que amar é ver o outro crescer. Raízes no chão, o amor renasceu. Eu te olhei de novo e o medo desapareceu. Entre a vergonha e a verdade, a dor se foi. Agora juntos nós sabemos quem somos e o que o amor pode fazer.